back to the bench. This is part 2 of our racing drone build, and in it we'll be binding our Spektrum serial receiver, flashing the newest Betaflight firmware to our Betaflight F3 board, configuring our ESCs in the BLHeli app, and configuring our Betaflight board in the Betaflight configurator. Our first step is to bind our Spektrum serial receiver to our transmitter. To do this, simply power your receiver by plugging it into the computer via the USB port without any transmitter turned on. After about 10 seconds, the receiver begins to blink rapidly, and that's letting you know that it is in bind mode. Once it begins to flash, the binding process is standard. Just hold down your bind button, power on your transmitter, and you should be good to go. Alright, and now that we've got our quad bound to our transmitter, we're going to go ahead and program the board. This is the Betaflight F3 board that we're using today, so naturally we're going to use the Betaflight configurator. So download Google Chrome if you haven't already and make your way over to the web store. Type in the search box Betaflight configurator, and let's get the app added to Chrome. Once we've got that downloaded, it appears in the apps section on Google Chrome. And at this point, we're going to want to check and make sure we have the correct drivers installed and that we're using the correct cable. So there are charging cables out there that are not data, they're just charging, and that's not going to work. Once you plug in with the correct data cable to your PC, you should see a COM port open up here in this top window, or you should see a driver installing down there at the bottom of your toolbar on your PC. So once you have a COM port opened up, go ahead and hit connect, and we're going to check and see which firmware we have loaded on this board. So we have version 3.1, which is not the latest version. So to update firmware, we're going to go down to the Flash Firmware tab. We're going to load. We're going to choose our board, which is the Betaflight F3 board. Then we're going to choose our firmware, which is the latest version, and go ahead and hit Load Firmware Online down there in the bottom right. We don't need the no reboot sequence, only the full chip erase here. Okay, once you have that loaded, you should just hit that Flash Firmware button. And you should see the bottom bar start to flash. And this process can vary from board to board, but this is how we do it on our Betaflight F3 board. And once our board has been flashed with the latest firmware, it's time to start programming. Alright, go ahead and hit connect. And the first thing we're going to want to check is that our board is in the correct orientation. So you'll notice when you pick up the quad and move it physically, the quad on the Betaflight configurator moves as well, and you just want to make sure it's moving correctly to how you're moving it physically. Okay, now go ahead and head on over to the Ports tab. We're going to set up our receiver. So serial RX needs to be enabled on UART 2. If you're using the Betaflight flight controller and you've done the build like I have in the previous build video, this is all standard. It's all labeled on the board. If you're using a different board, whichever signal you soldered to, whichever UART you soldered to for the signal is going to be the UART you want to enable serial RX for. So if you're using a different flight controller, this may not be the preset for you. And on the peripherals tab, we're going to on UART 3, we're going to enable the TBS Smart Audio, so we could access that, changing our VTX channels over the Betaflight OSD. So when you save and reboot, it's going to kick you out. Go ahead and reconnect, and head on over to the Configurations tab. So I want to talk a little bit about our ESCs. We're running D-Shot 600. If you're running multi-shot, one shot, 125, just make sure you know what your ESCs need and select that correct protocol. If you've plugged a battery in and you go down to the motors tab and your motors won't spin up, chances are you've selected the wrong ESC protocol. So make sure you know what your ESCs need and what they're flashed for. If you're running BLHeli-S, they can run any of the protocols listed on this drop-down menu except for brushed. So once you've selected your ESC protocol, head on down to the receiver tab, a receiver section of the configurations tab. Since we're running a serial receiver and we're using spektrum, we're going to select the 2045 spektrum protocol. Our PID loop and gyro frequencies, we've set it to 8K and 8K. If you're new to quads, leave your accelerometer enabled. That's what gives you level mode. If you've done this before and you've raced frequently, you may want to go ahead and just disable that. You may not need it. And the last thing we need to do on the configuration tab is just disable the features or enable features that you want or don't want. I don't use telemetry. You may, especially if you're doing free sky. I don't mess with the black box unless something's out of whack or I'm getting some weird vibrations. And I'm not using an SD card. You do want to make sure your OSD is enabled so you could take advantage of that. And then if you want to have a name pop up on the OSD, enter it here on the craft name. When you get done with that, save and reboot. When you reconnect, head on over to the receiver tab so we could program our radio. If you're on spektrum and you've got your transmitter turned on, this is what you're going to see, just a quad spinning. That's because our channel map needs to be set to the JR spektrum Gropner. Once you've selected that, go ahead and hit save, and you'll see it'll immediately stop spinning. Now we just need to set up our transmitter with the minimum and maximum endpoints. So go ahead and grab your transmitter and let's get to work on that. Alright, so if you're using spektrum, you could follow along with me. If you're using FreeSky, it's the same basic idea. We're setting our minimum and maximum endpoints, and we're gonna program that through the radio itself. Okay. So for spektrum, you're gonna go down to Servo Setup. The first option there is travel, and that's what we want. So travel in spektrum radio is going to determine your minimum and maximum endpoints. So you're going to want to increase that percentage until you have, with full throttle, a maximum of 2,000, and with the stick all the way lowered, I set mine at 1,030. So repeat the same process for aileron, elevator, and rudder. You're going to increase that percentage. So by moving the stick over, comparing, seeing how the sticks react in the receivers tab on Betaflight, and just increasing that percentage in order to reach a maximum of 2,000 and a minimum of 1,000. You want the receiver tab bars to coordinate with the direction. So full up pitch should be all the way to the right, and down should be all the way to the left. Right aileron should give you a bar that goes to the right. Right rudder should give you a bar that goes to the right, and left should go to the left. Again, you just want it to be at 2,000 and at 1,000 respectively. And this is the same process for FreeSky, spektrum, any of the Hobby King turnkey radios, anything that you fly, you want to have that maximum resolution programmed into your radio to have a nice, solid quad. Okay, so after you've set your min and max, you may notice that the midpoint is a little bit off, and that's normal. You're going to want to adjust that with subtrim. So hit your subtrim, get it back to 1500. All midpoints should be at 1500. If they're not, just give it a couple clicks either right or left to get that subtrim back. And it just depends on the radio and the receiver that you're using, how much you're going to actually need. Get it as close as you can. You'll probably have to go back and readjust your min and max endpoints using the travel function on your radio. Just get that done and we'll proceed to the next step. Okay, so if your midpoints are kind of bouncing back a couple digits, go ahead and give yourself a couple clicks of RC deadband and yaw deadband. That'll kind of ignore that and it won't make your quad drift. Okay, now head on over to the Modes tab. We're going to set our arm to a switch. To do this, the process is fairly simple. You want to identify aux1 or aux2, whichever switch you want to use. If you have 16 switches, aux16, if that's the one you want to use. Identify that one, and do this by flipping the switch, and you'll see the little dot move. And then adjust those sliders to where when the switch is in the position that you want to arm, that little slider bar falls where that little yellow dot is. And then once you're happy with that, go ahead and save it. And we're going to head on over to the Motors tab. Alright, and before we plug a battery in, number 1, remove your props. Number 2, make sure your VTX has an antenna plugged in. You don't want to run it without, you could burn it up. Number 3, make sure that it's not going to short out. So if you've already tested that third step, great. Alright, so go ahead and get your battery plugged in and arm the quad using the switch that we set up previously. And you'll notice a couple things right off the bat. Number 1, your motors are all spinning in the same direction. And that's because we soldered the wires, the motor wires, directly to the ESCs, just straight across. If we would have crisscrossed the wires, it would change the motor direction. We're going to change our motor direction though in the BL Heli app. It's a little bit cleaner on the build, and it just kind of keeps things simple. If you have to change a motor, you don't have to try to keep up with which ones to cross. The ESCs are already programmed in the BL Heli app. The second thing you may notice is that your motors continue to spin up, especially if you have air mode enabled, and that's completely normal. Your quad's not going to fly away when you plug a battery in. The motors are trying to compensate and trying to keep the quad level, just like the gyro and the accelerometer are telling it to, but it can't because there's no props on. So expect your motors to just continue to ramp up and ramp up. It's perfectly normal. Once you put props on the quad, that goes away. Okay. All right, and while you have your quad armed, go ahead and take note of which motors we need to reverse. If you've done your build like I did in the previous build video, motors 1 and 4 are going to be the motors that we're going to have to change in the BL Heli app. You could tell the motor direction by looking at the little icon, the little X configuration with 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those arrows are telling you which way the motors need to spin, and you'll notice that 1 and 4 are the ones that we're going to have to reverse. So let's go ahead and do that now. So disconnect and leave the Betaflight app open but not connected, and head on over to the Chrome web store, find the BL Heli Configurator app, and get it downloaded. Okay, and once you have that downloaded, there's a couple rules you have to follow to use the BL Heli Configurator. Number 1 is the ESCs have to have battery power, so make sure your battery is plugged in. The second one, that uses the same COM port as your BL Heli, as your Betaflight configurator, which is why you can't have it connected, but you need to have it open. And once you've got your battery plugged in and your Betaflight configurator open, go ahead and click that Read Setup button. It should be showing up down there in the bottom right. and we're going to reverse ESC 1 using the drop down menu, and ESC 4. So that's all we need to do on this particular build. If you're doing a different build and you're running a different protocol, you can actually set your minimum and maximum PWM throttle. You could do that here. That's the same as calibrating your ESCs. You could also update your ESC firmware in this app, and anything that you need to do as far as timing goes, you could do in this app as well. So when we're done with all the changes, we're going to go ahead and click Write Setup, and you'll see up at the top it's writing our ESCs. When that's completed, we can disconnect and head back on over to the Betaflight configurator. So even though we know we just saved it and we're pretty confident, let's go ahead and double check motor rotation now. So if you still got your battery plugged in, you could just arm the motors or spin them up on the motors tab and make sure that everything is indeed functioning correctly, because if it's not, it's going to give you the spin of death and may cut you up or at least break something. So we don't want that on a brand new build. So with that done, head on over to the OSD tab and deselect or select the features that you want to display. When you're done with everything, click Save. And this will conclude part 2 of our racing drone build, the setup video using the Betaflight F3 board, ESCs running BLHeli-S, and spektrum transmitter and receiver. If you liked what you saw today or you learned something, give the channel a like and subscribe, or leave a comment below if there's something that you would like to see in a future build video. I thank you all for watching, and have a great day.